Hey, good evening, YouTube. Tired Metalhead Weatherman. Hopefully, you guys are doing well today. Well, remember how I said in last night's video it was pretty quiet, which honestly it wasn't going to be regardless, but depending on how things developed today, I wasn't gonna make a video this evening, focus on other content. Yeah, that wasn't gonna happen. It's been very active today. There's been a few new updates that I have to talk about here, of course, and then of course we have this monster right here to deal with, and we're gonna see increasing changeover to snow here, and then of course there's high winds with this as well. Blizzard conditions are possible around parts of the Northeast here as well, so a lot of moving parts with this. And then further down the line, when it comes to the week ahead, we have potential for severe weather. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center has started to hone in on it, and we now have a day 4 slight risk, which we're going to get into momentarily. Then, of course, we have atmospheric river conditions ongoing now, shifting more so towards the northwest, but we will see some returns back to the southern part of California very soon. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it all. So start out with the precip that we're seeing over here across the west coast in particular. Like I said, the threat is shifted up north, and we're seeing those heavier totals over towards northern California now. We're getting up to about 4 to 5 inches plus. In some spots, locally, even higher totals are possible. And this is all based off of stuff that ended at about really 4 a.m. local time. Probably been more rain that's I'm almost certain there's been more rain that's fallen since then, so as a result these totals could be a lot higher by tomorrow morning. Then of course we already know the situation over here towards Florida. Few severe storms were possible today. There was a marginal risk for the peninsula, but when we go over to the National Weather Service site, we look for any reports. Nothing going right now. In fact, here's a perfect indicator. Oh wait, there is one hail report. That was recent. But as a whole though, today has been pretty quiet on the severe side, which we were kind of expecting. Next couple of days are going to be very similar, if not even quieter. But then we get this here. We get our day 4 slight risk on Thursday, and there's also potential for a Friday threat too. I've been watching that for the southeast. I'm honestly waiting on them to eventually just put up that slight risk. There is a trough that we've been talking about has strengthened a little bit more too over towards the southern plains for Thursday, so that's why that threat exists now. And it really now is showing on all 3 of the models, including the Euro, which before I was kind of on the fence with it. So there's pretty good confidence on Thursday's threat. Friday we're still a little bit shaky on that, and then there's a day 6, 7, or not 8, but day 6 and 7 labeled as predictability too low. So looking at a synopsis here, really, surface dew points, got a good moisture return there. Already know the adjacent trough is pretty impressive here. This mainly leans towards a supercellular threat with large hail and damaging wind. Tornadoes can't be ruled out here. There is a marginal tornado threat. I do think this probably needs to be updated here, but I think all hazards are actually possible with this. Then of course there's the day 5 threat across the southeast, and then of course over towards the Gulf Coast states in particular. There's a lot to keep an eye on, of course. So let's go ahead and actually get into things. First thing I'm actually going to cover real quick while I'm at it is actually going to be the wind gusts that will be coming with our associated winter storm over here. As this low goes offshore and starts to make a close pass with the Long Island area, we'll start to see these winds continually increasing inland. We'll start to see those 20-30 mile per hour gusts, and as time goes on, it doesn't get too much better. In fact, if anything, it gets a little bit more intense. So this low will eventually come back on shore across areas like Maine, and around the coast there, I'm starting to see gusts up to about 45, getting close to that 50 mile per hour mark. And those gusts that are a little bit more adjacent to the to the Long Island area, the northeastern coast here, we're starting to see widespread 35 mile per hour plus here. So as we move this forward, this low really starts to take it up a notch, and we could be seeing not only wind advisories, but maybe even a couple of high wind warnings depending on which area you're in. I'm especially leaning towards that as far as Maine, maybe Vermont and New Hampshire too. So a lot going on there, and then after that, there's other winter storms that are going to be coming in after the fact that we'll be needing to watch extremely close. This one will be the next one, which will be associated with our severe weather threat. Just that storm system as a whole really just looks like it has a large wind field with that. So this is going to be very problematic, it seems, as we head later into the week here. So now we know what's going on with the wintry side of things a bit here. Let's go ahead and actually take a look at what the models are looking like. I have this jumped ahead to about 72 hours out, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at what our trough is looking like. The other day, the euro looked very unimpressive. It looks a lot better now, and then there's even a bit of a maximum that's popped up here. Previous runs, we weren't seeing that. And then as we draw this forward about another frame or two, we start to see that maximum begin to pop up around our severe weather area as we head towards 21Z. So this will be about, I would say, 2 p.m. Central Time on Thursday, where we start to see conditions really start to become more and more favorable. And really, this exists across all the models here. Here's a look at the GFS, if I can get it to work. Okay, there we go. I don't know why it wasn't working. I have a hotkey commands on this. What the interesting thing with the GFS is this is a little bit further along. It's a little more progressive here, but at the same time, there's a much stronger area of forcing here, and there's a smaller maximum here. This lends itself to a little bit more of a tornado threat here. I'm gonna try to go ahead and take a look at a sounding, and voila, there you go. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. Very impressive low level hordeograph here. Very good curvature. Very strong SRH, or storm relative felicity. Cape is, of course, going to be questionable, considering we have a predominantly cold air mass in play. So it's going to be tough to it's going to be a tough battle here in regards to getting a thumper of a supercell, so to speak, but there is potential for it. This doesn't really have the classic supercell look. It has a weak one though, according to the sounding analogs. But the mixed layer cape is at about 670 joules, and then surface cape is at about 800. Still sufficient enough for severe weather, but as far as an enhanced tornado threat, not really there at the moment. This is very much prone to changing, and then we'll switch over to the NAM, which has this leaning back a little bit further like the Euro is. And when we go over to the same area, it's still a similar deal. Temperatures are about the same. Low level helicity very strong, curving helicity very strong. This lends itself more towards a supercell threat too, especially with the forcing being a tad bit more subtle. So there is, of course, a little bit of discrepancy to be had, but also this maximum right here that we see here is lagging a little bit. So this kind of limits the tornado threat just slightly. So as time goes on, we're going to get all that hashed out, but I at the very least would expect maybe a 5% tornado area developing within that slight risk. I don't see anything that screams to me that we will get an enhanced risk for that. Maybe more so towards damaging wind, but this is more so based off of what the GFS is showing there. So let's go ahead and look at some other parameters really quickly. We're going to go ahead and shift over to the dew points here. Moisture return is going to be a key factor in all of this, especially since we don't have as much energy in the atmosphere to really keep things well sustained here. Just the other parameters are going to have to be in enough abundance to where the atmosphere can overcome that. But this is what the Euro is showing right now. Moisture return is substantial. It's more than enough. It's more than sufficient, I would say, for severe weather development. I'd say the dew point has to be at least 55 in order for there to be any sort of talk with severe weather given other parameters, or partially dependent on other parameters. Over here towards Fort Worth is where I think some of the best conditions come together, but the shear is going to be mainly around Oklahoma City and Norman and areas to the east. So that being said, where our slight risk area is, I think we can expect a pretty considerable damaging wind threat. Just how strong that will be, still questionable. If we switch over to the GFS, I don't know why this thing is not switching right now. Like, I usually will hit a key and it'll do it without me having to go up there, but for whatever reason today I'm having problems with it. Like I said, the GFS is a little bit further along on this, so moist sector does go along, but this is definitely leaning more towards damaging winds, because look at this right here. This is what you call a dry line setup. Dry line setup is where you see the dew points in the 60s like this, and then right behind this line, right behind our frontal boundary, hence the name dry line, we get dew points that are 30 degrees lower. So that being said, this storm being more progressive here will lend itself to a greater damaging wind threat. Still could get embedded tornadoes, especially with as strong of a wind maximum that we have around that part of the upper level jet per se. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, or if this trend even holds, because the other models are kind of going away from this. The GFS is the only one that's really holding it right now. If we I'm gonna try. Okay, so my loop keys should be working. Okay, that's what's wrong. I had caps lock on. That makes sense. Now here is the NAM. The NAM had a little weaker forcing, but the moist sector with this is a lot more abundant, and it shoots further to the north here. So we could see multiple storm modes with this, especially supercellular modes. And this is the run that's concerning me the most right now. It's definitely the NAM, because this lends itself towards a little bit more of a tornado threat and maybe a little bit longer lasting storms. I think the area with the strongest cape is going to be right along the Texas-Oklahoma line here. I'm actually going to go ahead and click a sounding with that. Still seeing a marginal tornado threat, but you do have a couple of differences here in regards to both storm relative felicity, cape, supercell analogs, and of course the hordeograph. Hordeograph looks really interesting. The storms actually looks a little bit more discreet, but also kind of has a messy look to it. Probably going to be an HP type supercell. We'll see how that develops, but a lot of confidence in this being a classic supercell type setup over this region. And then of course we have, I don't know why that's popped up. Then of course on the analogs we actually have a significant supercell sounding. So like I said, a lot going on here. Another interesting thing to come into play is if we look at this here, what's that? That's a capping inversion here. I'm gonna go ahead and try to mark this if I can here. Let's see if it'll work. Nope. I'm trying to change the color. Just give me a second here. Alright, I got it changed. Too many hotkeys to remember, folks. But this is what we have here, right where I've circled in this region right here. This is our capping inversion. So this could hold those storms at bay for a little bit. But eventually, as that dry line draws closer, this cap is going to lift, and these storms will eventually start to fire. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and go as far as to even take it all the way to the next frame here on the NAM. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then we'll try to click this sounding again. Much greater confidence. Cap starts breaking by this point. Storm relative helicity really starts to develop here. Storm hordeograph looks really messy though. But we continue to hold that trend where we have that classic supercell look. Cape is really abundant when we get to this point though. So like I said, very alarming look on the NAM here. This even has a chance of maybe even getting significant tornado parameters. Jeez, I cannot speak. But I try not to read too much into the significant tornado parameters early on. Over the next couple of days, I think we'll hone into that more. So that's what we have going on there. Okay, my computer's actually starting to get a little bit weird. But that's what we have going on with the dew points. So just really from looking at two parameters here, we can clearly see that Thursday could be a day to watch out across to I cannot speak. Thursday could be a day to watch for sure across a lot of the southern plains and even heading into the Ozarks. There is a chance that this threat does persist into the southeast on Friday. We talked about that in yesterday's video, so I'm not going to elaborate too much on that right now. If things start to change, we will discuss it in a video tomorrow or Wednesday morning, because I'm trying to see if I can upload something tomorrow. A little bit of something different, but we'll get to that towards the end of the video. So we've looked at the upper level jet, we looked at the dew point, and then I guess really the last thing to look at is going to be more so the Cape values, and then also the cap, because with this kind of setup, we already know once the cap ends up breaking over this region, these storms are more than likely going to explode in both strength and coverage. I don't really like looking out this far ahead, but given the threat, I think this is a good example of what we could be seeing. Over towards the area where the greatest concern for weather is going to be, there are areas where we're getting above 1,000 joules per kilogram. There are areas where we're getting above 2,000 joules. So there is a semi-explosive environment here. Areas further to the north, we're kind of struggling here, but I'm not going to rule anything out yet, because really the best models for looking at Cape are the short-range models, which we aren't in range of just yet. I think that within the next day or two we will be. But this is what the Euro is showing. The NAM does a little bit better job here. We're over 2,000 joules for a large portion of the southern plains, especially into our slight risk area. Areas to the east of Oklahoma City, we have to watch you extremely close as we get into the evening hours here. Large pocket of 1,500 plus joules per kilogram beginning to develop here. But that's what we have on the mix layer. When we look at the surface-based Cape, we'll get some other models in the equation here. So here we are. We're going to go ahead and look at the GFS. The Euro, strangely enough, does not have a surface-based Cape indicator, so we're not going to be seeing that, unfortunately. But what we can see here is the surface Cape is going to be a big issue. I think that could also lean into the hail threat just a little bit as well. And as a result, I think this area will end up being stretched a little further to the east, maybe even a little further to the south here with these values that we're seeing here. Then, of course, when we look at the NAM, of course, we have higher values here. Again, with the GFS, everything's a little bit further along here, which I find kind of interesting with that run. But everything else is kind of staying consistent outside of the GFS. The GFS is the only real outlier right now. Let's go ahead and look at the capping inversion. We're going back to the Euro and the NAM here. And so far over this region, there is a pretty notable cap. Once you get to these brighter colors here, cap gets pretty strong. This makes it hard for storms to develop. Not impossible, but very difficult. But there, you can begin to notice here, there are some small holes that develop here and there. Like once you get to these lighter colors, especially towards the blue and the whites, that's where that cape is. Capping inversion has gotten weaker. Because if you notice, once I get over to these red areas and pink areas, we have we have negative cape values and pretty high ones, or the negative CIN value and very high ones, versus a little pocket right here where we're seeing negative 36 versus negative 229, 232, etc. So that being said, if we look at that plus the NAM's going to look a little crazier, I think. The NAM has this cap pretty much being busted wide open here and really allowing storm development to really explode here. So it's important to really look at the CIN sometimes, because that's going to be a tell for what we could be seeing as time goes on throughout the evening. The cap doesn't break, you don't see storms. If the cap breaks, it could be a long night. But we're kind of leaning towards that cap breaking. I mean, all the dynamics are there for it to break. And sometimes these capping inversions can often help or hurt a storm setup here. And that's exactly what we seem to be having indicated on the models here. I guess we could look at the low-level jet here before we wrap things up here, because that's also another key parameter in both damaging wind and tornadic activity here. So there's a lot to look at with this one here. Let's go with the high-res Euro first. There isn't a very strong low-level jet with the Euro, and that's the problem what we've been having with this. But there is a point between this low pressure here and these two troughs that have developed where we could see almost like a shear line try to develop. I'm leaning towards it mostly being damaging winds still with the Euro outcome right now. A little further to the south, it kind of leans a little bit more into a tornado threat, but not much. There is plenty of directional shear though, so a lot of question marks when we come to the Euro here. The Canadian, pretty much disregarding that. Canadian's been pretty unreliable as of late. GFS looks a little bit more interesting, but this is also a little further out ahead. This is more progressive, so there is a pretty strong wind maximum with this, but there's a little bit of a gap here where we're getting some weaker wind shear. So kind of hard. I'm still leaning towards damaging winds with this outcome, but with it being a little further out ahead, I think this could somewhat limit the tornado threat, but this is a pretty strong maximum right here that's developed at the low level, so that's going to have to be watched really close too. Not to say that the GFS outcome can't happen, but considering how the other models have trended, it's seeming a little bit like an outlier here. This is why I always look over every model. The NAM also has a really strong outcome, but it's a little bit more similar to the GFS in this look here. Plenty of directional shear, decent speed shear, but it's almost like the strongest shear is outrunning the worst, where the worst of the weather could be expected. Again, we'll have to see how this trends. We still have several days to go just before we even get to Thursday, so a lot can still change. If anything, we're hoping that this downtrends. We'll see what happens there. So yeah, that's the end of this video though. Hope you guys enjoyed it and found it useful. If you did, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Share the video to anyone that you think may find it useful. And of course, let me know in the comments what you're thinking of this weather pattern, or if you're in an area of interest. But anyway, I'm gonna try to get this content done for you guys so you can have something to watch on Tuesday for sure. But this has been Metalhead Weatherman. You guys have a good night. Take care. I'll see you soon.